Welcome into the Autzen Audibles podcast. I'm at Prehm, Erik Skopil, John Evans on the show, previewing Friday night's Peach Bowl semifinal in the college football playoffs. Oregon versus number one seed Indiana, a rematch of a game played in Eugene. The Ducks lost that one 30-20, middle of October. Both teams drastically different going into this one. And speaking of different, the Ducks are going to look significantly different in their run game based off of the availability report, and also a report that came out earlier in the day from the Oregonians' Aaron Fentress. Freshman running back Jordon Davison is ruled out in the availability report. Fentress's reporting suggests that he has a collarbone injury and his future is uncertain moving forward. I think it's notable to note that Oregon chose to not list him as out for the season. They could have done that. The door is maybe ever so slightly cracked open, the sliver of light shining through that he maybe could play down the road if Oregon advances. But I don't put a lot of stock into that. But nonetheless, this is a massive blow to a team that has been coming along offensively, the last couple weeks. Obviously, they weren't electric against Texas Tech, but everything before that they were. And he is by far their most physical, aggressive, in between the tackles type running back. And quite frankly, I don't know if they have a guy on the roster because of all the portal departures that can replicate what he could do.
Yeah. And before we jump into kind of where they're at running back, this is such a weird story in that, he played the whole game at the Orange Bowl. And this was the rumor that first kind of started to eke out, I guess that would have been Monday night, was he got hurt during the early part of the Orange Bowl, re-aggravated it at the very end on the touchdown or right before that, and broke his collarbone. And I think I was skeptical of that rumor because I interviewed him directly after the game in the locker room, and he was fine. That shows how tough this kid is, where he was standing there talking to reporters and for everything for 20 plus minutes, going through everything, didn't seem to even wince once. I didn't pick up on anything. And that's just such a tough break, pun not intended in this case, to lose a guy like this right before a game like this. And especially now to get to the other part of this, the availability report comes out. We already knew Dejon Riggs would be missing in action. Hasn't been officially announced out for this season. I think he's out for this season. He wasn't in pads at the Orange Bowl. Doesn't look like he's close. But also Mekhi Hughes and Jaden Lamar, two running backs who hit the portal, also listed here. And as I was talking with John and Matt before we jumped on, I remember parts of this year where, Hughes has to be shut down because he's not getting any run in this offense because there are 6 viable running backs. Now you're at a spot where there's no Whittington, De'Aaron Hill Jr., and then this is the question that I have, Matt, is what's going on with Jay Harris? Is he available for this game? He is also in the transfer portal. We just got word right before we jumped on here that he is officially in the portal. He announced it, but he's officially in there. We saw him at Monday's practice. Is he available? And if he's not, can they really get this done with 2 running backs? And we can have a whole other discussion about the portal and how ridiculous all of this is for the calendar when you're competing for a college football playoff spot and Oregon's running back depth gets absolutely debilitated by a bad break injury and then a couple of kids bouncing because they're looking for their next spot. I mean, all of it is just kind of a disaster. And we'll talk about this game. I don't think this necessarily ruins Oregon's chances of winning or winning a national championship by any means, but it's a huge blow to a big part of this offense, not having number 0 out there.
Yeah, I feel like Davidson had, especially over the second half of this season, had really come along and they had developed kind of this 3-headed monster they have at running back, with Whittington being that first guy and then the 2 true freshmen and each of their, different skill sets that they bring. But like you were saying, just brutal timing on this, where because of the issues that Dan has talked about, everyone has talked about with the calendar, you have this going into a huge game and all these other guys in the portal that you can't draw on anymore. But Davison, especially for this game, he was the one that really was able to get the ground game going against Indiana. And that first one had 8 carries, 59 yards, broke off a 26-yarder at one point. And that was a game where Oregon's numbers on the day don't look that good. But when you take out all the sacks that Dante took, Oregon was able to actually run the ball pretty well in that one. And especially when they were go into the 12 personnel, go into their more physical stuff that they've done with Davison. So if they don't have that option, it's going to be interesting because De'Ara Hill had 3 carries, -3 yards in that game, and he's going to be Oregon's RB2, and he doesn't bring as much of a different type of game as Davison does. It's more similar to what Whittington provides as offense.
And this program's operated for basically the entire year with 3 and even oftentimes 4 running backs. Now they only have 2. And I think Noah Whittington is a absolute dynamite player. I also think you look at his usage rate across the entire season. Oregon has probably known, hey, this is a guy that has kind of a ceiling of touches that we can give him on a per game basis or over a long stretch of time, because if we go over that number, the likelihood of maybe an injury pops up, and they've balanced that. Now, granted, there's only 2 possible games left of your season. You use everything that you have in your chamber if you're Oregon and playing. But to John's point too, De'Ara Hill was not really an effective player against Indiana, and this whole season he's either been highly effective or he's been a guy that's kind of been more of a decoy. But what happens if Jay Harris is not available, who, by the way, as of this recording, went into the portal officially today, which is Wednesday, January 7th. So we'll see if he shows up to Atlanta. We will not be at the airport like we were for the Orange Bowl. Oregon's media availability upon arrival is at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. He's not naturally one of the 4 players that they are bringing, but Will Stein is Oregon's offensive coordinator, so we'll certainly have to talk to him about Jay Harris's availability if he does play. But let's just talk it out for a second here. If Jay Harris doesn't play in this game despite being in the portal, your third running back is essentially Xander Quinn, a junior walk-on. I don't know if anyone really knows who Xander Quinn is. Hasn't played all season long. They did move Braden Platt. I mean, Eric, we were at practice.
That's where my head's at, is Platt.
Yeah, we went to practice, and we didn't think anything of it. We just thought that's strange. Maybe they're trying to give like a look or something for the scout team or what have you. But Braden Platt was taking some reps at running back, at least the stretching stuff and the kind of the really early individual work that we saw. An Oregon linebacker, maybe he's the emergency running back. A buddy of mine, I was talking to him about this while I was traveling, and he suggested we've seen a lot of Decorium Moore in the backfield. Is that an option? We've seen Kenyon Sadiq get a handful of carries across his 3 years at Oregon.
That's who I was going to mention, even just getting some of those fullback looks that Davidson has gotten, because he's become such a key part of Oregon's blocking scheme as well. So I think Sadiq could offer some of that, because you would run out there with Sadiq and Johnson. You could replace him with Roger Saliapaga.
And that kind of goes with the flexibility that I think Kenyon Sadiq gives you, especially with the development of Jamari Johnson. You know, he can play the traditional tight end role, but nonetheless, this is a huge storyline. I'm with you, Eric, though. I don't think this ultimately shuts the door that Oregon can't win this football game. I certainly think they can win without Jordon Davison playing. And a big reason why I think they could is Dante Moore is a different quarterback than he was the first time around. I want to expand on that more here in a little bit, but the portal has also taken players out of action essentially across other positions, guys that have been playing consistently this season. Eric, why don't we run down real quick who is officially out beyond Jordon Davison, because we've touched on that already, but there's more guys than just him.
Yeah. No surprise on some of these because they've been listed out for a while, but recent portal additions, Dalen Austin also out. That was Oregon's backup nickel. Sione Laulea, Makai Hughes, who I mentioned earlier, Kingston Lopa, who I mentioned last. Obviously, he wasn't available last game. You know, those are 2 names though with Lopa and Austin who were playing, not a lot, but they were involved in every game Oregon played this year in the secondary. You know, Dan Lanning, before we had all of this running back turnover, was joking at the Saturday press conference that he might have to line up at nickel. As far as we know, I think Zach Grisham, a walk-on, is the backup there. I would imagine you just see a ton of Jaden Kennedy, but that becomes a position where, boy, you are really thin. And then receiver Kyler Casper, Evan Stewart, Justice Lowe, all also out. It tells you kind of where things are at with the Davison news, where we just kind of raced past Evan Stewart, although I think we all kind of know where that story is at right now. I wouldn't anticipate anything changes. But he is not someone you're going to expect to see in this football game. So it's not just running back. It's also a little lighter at safety. Lopa was kind of their 3 or 4 safety, played a decent amount in certain matchups, had that size at 6'5". That was interesting. And then Dalen Austin, obviously, as the backup nickel corner there, was playing a handful to more, a dozen or so snaps per game. I think he played 6 snaps as recently as the Orange Bowl. Excuse me. So, yeah, no, they're getting hit all over the place. And this is why the portal is it's just a mess that you have free agency going on during the playoffs. I mean, I just, can you imagine? I mean, the NFL is about to start its postseason this upcoming weekend. Can you imagine if the Chargers were battling to retain some of their players that other teams who were eliminated were trying to sign? I mean, it's just ludicrous. And, frankly, I remember in 2023 when I think it was Malik Murphy at Texas transferred right before the College Football Playoff. It was a 14 playoff then. They were set to play Washington, and kind of being like, oh, that's crazy that you're losing a backup quarterback. What happens if Quinn Ewers goes down? This is nuts. It's wild to see it at this magnitude, though, at a school like Oregon that is very much in the mix here, where, again, I don't want to make too big of an issue out of these departures, because Oregon still has a ton of really good players. And aside from Davidson, none of these are like starting caliber players. But just to have players not available for this game that would have been impacts is just a really rough look for everybody involved. I feel for the team. I feel for the fans who are going to go out to this game. Hopefully Oregon is able to overcome it. But man, I mean, just to be looking at this availability report and be like, there's like a dozen guys on it and most of them are healthy before a semifinal of a playoffs. It's kind of hard to wrap your brain around, to be totally honest.
Yeah, I think the Austin one is one that really stands out to me, because he's a guy that has made an impact throughout this season, and there is just really like not that much depth behind a guy in Jaden Kennedy out there who's so important to this defense that if anything were to happen to him, I'm not really sure what they would do, because as Zach Grisham has played that, but they have so much of Kennedy in terms of him being a guy who plays in run support, him being a guy who can play the nickel, play up top over as safety. Dalen Austin has done some of that stuff this year, and I thought he would be the guy who could kind of just step right into that next year. So I think that would be asking a lot from someone like Trey McNutt to try to step up and get on board and get up to speed with all that, and in terms of how complex Oregon's defense is at this point. So yeah, just a weird situation that you have to deal with in these days of college football.
I think an underlying thing that's maybe impacting Oregon or could impact Oregon potentially is we've talked about, or we've heard Dan Lanning all year talk about how they're able to push each other because they've got so much depth, their development and practice, they're able to prepare. And now you've lost probably, 13 guys that highly regarded players, highly regarded athletes. Well, maybe not having big roles on this year's team, not every one of them, but they were highly regarded players giving you good scout looks. And that was something that Texas Tech could not replicate. That was something that JMU could not replicate in practice, because they didn't have those types of players on their roster. And Oregon has plenty of them, to the point where they were able to get good looks in scout games. And that could impact things. That's just a deep layer thing to make a note of, that could impact Oregon's preparation for Friday night's game. All right, let's transition now towards the matchups here. Obviously, I think my first thought, I don't know where you guys go, you can answer this too, but the first question I have, like when you look at the first game and the second game, is Dante Moore and the offensive line. Is Oregon prepared? Are they better prepared for the sim pressures, the teases that they're going to give, and where all the splits will come from? Because that was, to me, why Oregon lost. Oregon's offense couldn't protect Dante Moore, and Dante Moore couldn't really – he had too much happy feet and didn't really know where to go with the football. He's a different quarterback now, but that's kind of where I'm looking at. Like my first big concern of this game is how far along, how developed do we really think Dante Moore has become since that game? Because if he struggles again, I have a hard time seeing them win this game in that manner. But I also think the game that against Texas Tech showed us a ton, and the command and the under control and the poise and the growth that he's had in those areas to give me some confidence going into this one.
Yeah, it has to start there, right? I mean, I just got the splits up here from PFF. 24 total pressures in that game, 6 sacks. Oregon was 3 of 14 on third down. A lot of those were third and not as manageable as you'd like. I think it was like 3rd and 7 on average for that game. That's not a tenable way to win a playoff game, even though I'll acknowledge, like against Texas Tech, they were 4 of 19 on third down. The offense, I think it was only 7 pressures and 2 sacks, but there was impact of the pass rush on Dante. You definitely saw growth, I think, against Texas Tech, considering just the caliber of athlete that the Red Raiders put out there, and their ability to force him to move up in the pocket. And that was one of the things. I thought it was a really interesting quote that Dante gave on Tuesday was, you know, I think I asked him about just kind of like, what did you learn from the first game? And one of the things he said was, I think the first thing a young quarterback when he gets to college should learn is how to set protections. Like that needs to be the priority. And I don't think it was necessarily a criticism over his staff for not doing it, but I think it just, that game put on display how, in his words, like, it doesn't matter how good of a passer you are, you can't complete passes if you're on your backside, right? So this is crucial in this game. You know, the Oregon offensive line is obviously one of the best in the country. I thought they stacked up better than some people are giving them credit for against Tech, frankly. I thought the first quarter was rough. They kind of settled in, and it wasn't a problem aside from some snap issues after. But to your point, Matt, and this is why I have confidence Oregon's offensive line is a step further. I have confidence Dante Moore is more confident in the pocket. That was one of the things he talked about, how he had happy feet, how he rose in the pocket and decided to run rather than continuing to go through his progressions downfield. I don't doubt there's been growth there. I guess it's hard for me to quantify like how much growth we've seen against this specific type of defense, because as we've talked all week, like the way Indiana attacks you and your offensive line and your quarterback on pass downs is very different than Texas Tech. Texas Tech was essentially line up, play you 3 to 4 guys at the line of scrimmage, just try to win those matchups, leave everybody else back in coverage. Indiana is, like you said, Matt, a ton of simulated pressures, a lot of looks that you just kind of don't necessarily know where they're coming from. I thought something that was really interesting that John and I talked about after the interviews yesterday was you know, when you talk about Oregon's offense and you talk about kind of like the agency the quarterback has at the line of scrimmage, Indiana's Aiden Fisher, their star middle linebacker, has that same agency at the line of scrimmage defensively to see what the offensive checks are and to make those checks defensively. I would be curious to see if Bryce Betcher has the same freedom. That was something we talked about, John and I did as we walked out, like how common is that? But that kind of adds up to why maybe if this is something that's a little different, that makes sense to why maybe Indiana is a little more difficult to prepare for, because they're out there operating with that same kind of like quick trigger. Doesn't necessarily have to come from the sideline. The players in the field are able to assess like, hey, we need to get out of this look into that look because of what the other team is doing. So just a lot going on there. And you have to, if you're Oregon, find a way to keep Dante Moore upright and to allow him to really scan the field and have some success.
Yeah, this Indiana defense is built on discipline and communication, like you were saying, with Fisher being able to change plays out there. But you also have to have the discipline to not reveal anything before all of a sudden you're rotating to a cover 2 at the last second when you were giving them a 1 high look on the snap. And then Dante is looking at his pre-snap read. All of a sudden that's not there. And then he takes a sack. That was what was happening in that first game, where he even said yesterday that he was seeing ghosts out there, just bailing out when he didn't need to because he felt like there was pressure. Or at times there were ones in the second half where he was just setting his protection to the right and the blitz would come from the left because he didn't know what he was looking at yet. And he's had so much more experience. I think that was something that Dan has really kind of hammered down to people, is that was his 11th career start, not even a full season worth of starts when you're playing that team. That's going to be really tough. And he has gotten a lot better since then. They've played defenses that have thrown simulated pressures at him. I think he handled that really well in the Washington game, especially just getting the offensive line set to go the right way and stuff like that. He's been really good at navigating the pocket throughout the season. He has a tendency to float at times where he'll kind of drift backwards and get himself into trouble. But we saw it too in that Texas Tech game, stepping up, getting out of the pocket and hitting Jamari Johnson on that sail route. at one point late. I think it was later in the first half, but yeah, he just needs to. If he plays his game, he can beat this. He can beat this Indiana team. We saw it against Texas Tech last week, where he was hitting the quick passing game and stuff, and they were able to move the ball at times in that one. That's what Dan said. You got to do is take what the defense gives you. You can't try to force things against this Indiana defense. If you get a shot and it's there, like they did on that big hitter to Benson in that first game, take it because you're going to need all of those. But I think just playing a clean football game, getting the ball out quickly is going to be as important for Dante as anything.
I really think also that the development, the development of Malik Benson, Jeremiah McClellan, and Jamari Johnson are further along in this game going into this rematch than they were going into the first round of these two teams playing each other. And I look at this saying, like, I know Decorian Moore and Gary Bryant Jr. Played in that game the first time around and had big impacts, but so did Benson. Quite frankly, he had a touchdown. But I just look at the scope of the year, and you factor in a healthy Decorian Moore and Gary Bryant Jr. with the connection J-Mac and Benson and Jamari Johnson have developed with Dante Moore. You throw in the Kenyon Sadiq aspect as well, and I think Oregon's passing game is probably significantly better now than it was the first time around. And so if Oregon's going to win, they at least have some kind of a strength to lean into without Jordon Davison. Oh, well, we don't have maybe our bruising power running back, and while we still need to be able to effectively run the football, our depth throwing the ball has drastically improved, and our playmaking there has drastically improved the first time around. And then Dante Moore himself has also drastically improved. I will, though, say I don't like it when my quarterback comes out and says, I was seeing ghosts. That's probably not a sign of confidence if you're Oregon going into this one a little bit, because look, Indiana's new. They're an improved team too. They are nowhere near the same level of a program they were in October, and they are going to throw some new wrinkles at Dante Moore at this Oregon offense that they have not seen, that they didn't see that first meeting around, and how quickly can Oregon adjust and adapt to that is going to be another big key to this game.
I think one of my biggest points of curiosity is, does Oregon was in kind of a base 11 personnel offense the first time around. And John, I know you track this on your spreadsheet, so if you can maybe pull this up, I'm curious to see the difference on October 11th in terms of how much two tight end, how much two running back, how much just like what were their splits there going into this game where Oregon is now primarily playing with two tight ends. Like we talk about Gary Bryant Jr.'s involvement, and it hasn't been very much because they don't really run a lot of three wide receiver sets where there's even a slot receiver on the field. So, and one of the things that's great about Will Stein's offense, and he's talked about, is that the plays don't really change. It's just the personnel groups change, the numbers change. I'm very curious to see, is this a difficult matchup for Indiana because of just the versatility, the strength at the line of scrimmage they now have, the size when they play both Kenyon and Jamari? I find that to be interesting. And then I guess just one other layer to that I wanted to touch on is, do we see any two running back sets? Because you can also tell me, John, how many they've been using those all season with Davison and Hill. Without Davison, I sort of suspect we see that look almost out the window, maybe not entirely, but to a pretty large degree. So what can you tell me, John, about what were their offensive formations primarily used in the first game? And maybe can you, if you've got it, what was it against Texas Tech? How is that different?
Yeah, it was still a pretty 11 heavy split. It was over 60% in 11, and since then it's been 60% in 12 every game. So they've really just changed what their base offensive personnel is. They've Jamari Johnson at this point is a full-time starter for this offense and the amount of snaps he plays. So I think that's what we're going to continue to see, and it matches up differently against Indiana because this is something I was asking guys about yesterday. They have really, really good linebackers, and they got three of them who they can run out there, who fit the run really well, can They bring them on. They're a big part of what they do with the blitzes. So I think that it's going to be an interesting matchup. And the 21 stuff, I doubt we see as much of it because so much of what they do with that stuff is Davison and Hill together. It was either Davison and Hill or Lamar and Whittington normally, where it's one guy who's more of a blocker, more physical, and then one guy who's more of the speed option. I don't know if you see as much of that stuff, but maybe you get Kenyon Sadiq playing some of that fullback, right? Put him in the backfield, or maybe even give him a handoff at some point.
Let's play devil's advocate. Jay Harris does play. He is with this team. Mm-hmm. Can he fill that role? Can he be an effective Jordon Davison lead blocker? And maybe not as often as Jordon Davison gets carries because he got a ton when he played, but an occasional ball carrier that's effective. Do we have confidence that he can fill that role to a degree?
I don't know if we have confidence that he can fill that role just because it hasn't been asked of him this season. The snaps he gets out there mostly are just him being the main running back and when it's late in the game. But I think they're going to have to put it out there just to kind of show you have this option. That it's something that they have to worry about at some point, maybe in the game.
I had one other thing for this side of the ball, and then we can jump to Oregon's defense unless you guys have more. And it's just Indiana related it's really impressive just the depth of quality players that they have on defense and on both sides of the ball, quite frankly. And there's one pretty big weakness based upon PFF grades on Indiana's offense. But like you look at Indiana's defense, and there's not a guy with a grade under 67. And for those who aren't familiar with PFF, and I know some people try not to be familiar because they're frustrated by it, but if you're in the high 60s, that means you're not a bad player. That's like the Aaron Flowers range, and most of their guys are 75 and above. And I just think you look at this defense for Indiana and how they've been able to maintain the losses of a couple of key edge guys with Daly and Wyatt out. They just have a ton of really good players. And when you have an offense like Oregon that is potentially entering this game down a portion or at least a component of its offense with Davidson now not available. And I don't want to overplay what the impact of that is. And maybe Oregon's going to come out and they're going to run the ball really effectively. And this is going to sound really silly in like 72 hours. But that does make me a little wary of just like, I think Indiana is built to shut down just about everything you want to throw at them. And because they have so many good players and they're, like John said, they're so disciplined defensively and very exotic. I just wonder, like, what's the impact here of just their ability to kind of take away everything Oregon wants to do because they have so many good players on the field, and Oregon maybe is lacking some of its top guys, or at least one of its top players in a really key role.
I'd be curious to see if this was already in the game plan a little bit of rolling Dante Moore out and having him be more involved in the run game.
Yeah.
We haven't seen that a ton. He's certainly shown that he can do it. And if you're trying to manufacture a run game, that's one way to do it, is to kind of roll out your quarterback and kind of RPO, let him read the defense. If no one's open, then run the football. That kind of gets you away from the box defense that Indiana wants to, play in space. If you're Oregon, let your athletes do their job. Because I agree with you, Eric. Like, we'll talk about this later, but like on paper, Indiana shouldn't be this good based on team talent, but their coaching is elite. Their player development is elite. And they've got just enough guys that are NFL dudes that are on this roster. And they've got a lot of them that they play well above maybe their paper weight, what it suggests. And they've done a really good job all season long of basically just suffocating teams whenever they play them. And they did it against Alabama, and look how tough it was for an Alabama team that struggled to run the football to be able to move up and down the field in the Rose Bowl against Indiana. I'm not saying they are far, far above better running team than Alabama was this season, but that's a team that struggled to run because they didn't have a lot of options, and it was difficult offense for them. And Oregon's options at the run game certainly are limited now. They're not done. They're not done for. They've got two guys that are really electric, no doubt about it. But I think the type of style you need to have to win this type of game, it's going to be hard without Davidson. And if you can't run the football, we've already seen what Indiana can do to an offense who can't.
You just can't be putting Dante Moore in those types of situations consistently. If you want to win this game, you can't have him in 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9, 3rd and 10. That's where, as good as he has been, it's difficult for quarterbacks to succeed, and it's got to start getting set up by that run game. If you don't have it to at least some level to make it a little bit easier for him, it's going to be very tough to operate.
Just one other thing here, because I know this is probably, if you're an Oregon fan, you're listening to this, you think we're so negative about the run game component. Let's remember how good these running backs are that Oregon does still have. And Whittington and Hill, I've just got this pulled up here. Davison was PFF's top graded rusher in the Big Ten. De'Ara Hill was 3rd and Whittington was 5th. So you still have 2 of the 5 best running backs in the Big Ten. And I pulled it up earlier, and I can't remember the exact numbers, but I think these are both top 35-ish running backs nationally based upon PFF grades. So Oregon's not screwed here by any means. And Oregon has 2 really good running backs. It's just you lose a little bit of the variety, a little of the versatility, a little of the kind of creativity you can use, just because, I mean, Will has had so much personnel flexibility because, to the point we made earlier, they've just got so many good players, and now you're removing one of the best. So I know it probably comes across heavy-handed and maybe a little too little like sirens are ringing, although I think some sirens might have just been going by John's place.
I think somebody just drove by my apartment.
So bad timing on that part. But there's certainly the run game isn't DOA by any means, but there's reason to now have just a little bit more questions about what it's going to look like and if it'll work. And whatever it is, it'll just be very different than what it's been really the entire season, because Davidson was such a fixture out there for them.
Yeah, and one other thing too is they were able to run the ball really well from 12 in that last game. They were 7.9 yards per carry, just about on 12 carries with 2 tight ends out there. A lot of those were from Davison, but just in general, they were blocking things up really well when they had the 2 tight end sets, which is what they're going to primarily lean on in this game.
All right, defensively here. This is from an Oregon perspective. Fernando Mendoza has. If you had told me last season at California, watching him play on the Calgorithm at Pac-12 After Dark or ACC After Dark, whatever you want to call it, he would turn into the first overall draft pick next year in the NFL draft, I would not have believed you, let alone win the Heisman. But this is the growth that this guy has had. He makes every play. He doesn't make mistakes. I think that's the thing to me that really stands out when Oregon's going to have to defend Indiana is they need to put him into some difficult situations, just like John was talking about for Oregon, avoiding the 3rd and longs on a consistent basis. If Oregon can continually win on 1st and 2nd down like they did against Indiana, or like they did against Texas Tech, and force Mendoza into situations where it's 3rd and long, 3rd and medium every time for you to convert a 1st down, eventually Oregon will win those battles. I really believe it. But if Oregon can't force the 3rd and difficult situations, it's going to be really hard to get off the football field here. And I know it's so cliche and whatnot to say you got to win the turnover battle, but when games and opponents are so evenly matched, that stuff matters. That's why Oregon's offense could sputter the way it did against Texas Tech and still win in kind of dominant fashion, because Oregon's defense was lights out. And I don't think it's fair to expect that level of replication this time around. But if Oregon can put even something close to the level that they did against Texas Tech on Indiana, Oregon's the negativity maybe we had or the concerns we had offensively kind of even out a little bit. But stopping Fernando Mendoza is going to be the biggest and toughest task, I think, just because he doesn't make mistakes. He knows where to go, and he is a legitimate 1st-round draft pick.
You're right. The blueprint to a win here, if the offense doesn't do what we've seen them do most of the season, it was on display last week in Miami, the game that Matt and I are both at, where like Oregon's offense has one of its worst games of the season. It's really never able to get any consistent momentum, and when they do, a lot of it was self-inflicted. But the defense ends up picking them up. Obviously, a shutout. You can't lose with a shutout. Last I checked, it's pretty hard. I don't think anybody does, that Indiana is going to come out of this game without any points. Clip it. If that's what happens, clip it. I mean, that's crazy. But I think the real key, I totally agree with you, Matt, is you got to get off the field on third down. And I was looking back at the first matchup, and Indiana wins this game with 3 scoring drives that all go the length of the field. 3 touchdown drives that go 75 yards. The rest of it are field goals. And they were all 9 plays, 12 plays, like long drives. The one in the fourth quarter, I believe they had 3 third down conversions and a fourth down conversion on it. Or maybe it was 2 and 1. I know they had 3 conversions on later downs. Those are places you've just got to win and get off the field. And I give so much credit to Indiana and its offense. I think Mendoza obviously gets a lot of the credit, but just the consistency of that run game on short yardage really stood out in that first game when you rewatch it. It seemed like anytime it was 3rd and 2, 4th and 2, they got it. And sometimes it was with Mendoza using his leg, but primarily it was like him being black on the ground. And for as much as Mendoza gets talked about, it's such a duplicitous, I guess, offense where they have 2 ways of really beating you. And I'm so fascinated. And if Davidson hadn't gotten injured, I would have liked to start the show talking about this side of the ball, because this is to me a real curious part of Oregon's defense. Just played its best game of the season. Could argue maybe its best game of the Dan Lanning era. Certainly its best game, in a big game, in a big moment. And now they're facing the unquestioned best offense remaining in the field with the Heisman Trophy winner. This is the thing that stands out. Like, Elijah Surratt cooked Oregon in that first game. Like, that was one of the more impressive receiving games. They also have Cooper, and then Charlie Becker quietly has evolved, like, in a way where he is a real weapon here. And so, just like I was kind of talking about the Indiana defense and their kind of just surplus of good players, there's something to be said on the other side of the ball for this Indiana team, where they can probably find ways to manufacture offense, even if Surratt is sort of limited in this game because of the progress we've seen with those other receivers. And Cooper's like their leading statistical receiver on the season, in part because Surratt missed some games and whatnot. But like, they've got 3 legit dudes to kind of deal with that receiver. And Oregon's ability to win there, I think, is so much of it's going to be dependent upon its pass rush, right? And we just saw its best pass rush week of the season against Texas Tech. A bunch of guys were difference makers, mostly coming off the edge. Indiana's Carson Smith is a guy who, like, Oregon probably has to win a couple of those. And if they don't, it's going to be difficult. And I did bring it up earlier. There is one weak spot on this offensive line and on this offense, and it's Bray Lynch, the right guard. And we highlighted this matchup in the first game. Oregon took advantage of it a little bit. I can't remember who it was. Somebody beat him pretty badly for a sack or a forced pressure.
Amari had like a highlight reel bull rush on him at one point.
That's right. And I just look at this and go, that to me feels like, and I'm not an exact science, we're using PFF grades, but his 2 worst PFF graded games are the games that were most competitive for Indiana in terms of nearly, like Penn State, 49.8 was his worst grade of the season. That was a game they won by 1 score. His next lowest game was against Ohio State in another 3-point game. And in those games, he had an 18.4 pass block rate against Ohio State and a 55.1 against Penn State. I think Washington is huge in this game, in that matchup. Like, they really need him and Bear or Tion Gray or Terrence Green, whoever it is. Those guys need to win up front on this guy because, again, it's a really balanced, talented offense for Indiana, but this just feels like the one guy you can maybe pick on. And if Oregon's going to do enough to get off the field regularly, it feels like, gosh, you got to maybe get a couple sacks here or cause Mendoza to speed up a little bit. And this is the guy to target.
Yeah, you need every level of your defense to show up to beat a team like Indiana on Friday. Like, you're going to need the pass rush to be able to get after him, to get him, Mendoza, potentially in some of those situations. If you can get a sack on him, you need guys like Finney to hold up in coverage, which he has done all year, but you need Theron Johnson, if he's matched up one-on-one against Surratt, like we saw in that last game. That was a matchup that Indiana took advantage of, especially on those 3rd and 8s, 3rd and 9s. That's what Mendoza was able to do really well, was he could make just NFL throws on 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9, hit his guys with perfect placement and beat a guy in Ifeoma Badegu or Theron Johnson, who's not Oregon's strongest corner, because that's Finney, obviously. So I think if they potentially travel Finney with a guy like Surratt would be interesting to watch. But yeah, shutting down this run game is also going to be really important. You just need everybody to play their best game. You need the defensive line like you were saying, to take advantage of a weaker spot at guard, Amari and Bear to win their gaps, and Tatum and Mateo to really keep things sealed in on the edge, because Hemby and Black has really, especially over the last couple of games, they've been this 1-2 punch that Indiana's run game has been really, really difficult to stop when they're blocking things as well as they are with their offensive line. And then I think you're going to need a really big game from Bryce Betcher and someone to make a play and make a turnover. Like you got that in the last game against Indiana. This was one of Mendoza's worst games of the season, where he made that mistake late in the game through the pick six to Brandon Finney, but then down the stretch, they couldn't get off the field on those third downs. So you're going to need to make one of those plays, which you did last game, but then got to step up when it matters. And those third downs late in the game where Oregon's defense just felt like they had been out there for forever at that point on those super long drives. And it was just really hard for them to get off the field.
Charlie Becker, and keeping him under control, I think, is going to be a wild card, because Eric, what was the stat? He played like 10 snaps or something against Oregon the first time around.
Yeah, it was 10. It had one target, no catches.
Like really little production in that game. And quite frankly, didn't really do anything this season until Elijah Surratt got hurt. But once he kind of got on the field, he's become just as good as their top two receivers. You know, has 3 games over 100 yards in the last 5. He's got a touchdown in 2 of the last 4 games, one against Wisconsin, one against Alabama. He went 6 for 126 against Ohio State, 2 for 51 against Alabama in the Rose Bowl. This is another guy that a big body player too. You know, when you look at his frame of 6'4", 210 pounds, like that's a physical player, and it's going to put the stress on Oregon's secondary to play man-to-man coverage. I saw a quote from one of Indiana's offensive players that said Oregon played man coverage 70% of the time the first time around. I'll be curious. He even said, like, I'll be curious to see if Oregon kind of matches that, if they do that again, if they're similar, or if they make changes. I also think, much like we talked about, Eric, in our previous show against Texas Tech, like how physical does the officiating allow Oregon's corners to be? Because we know their brand. They want to play football in a phone booth. They want to maul you all the way down the football field. And if that's going to be allowed, I've got more confidence in them winning. But if it's going to be ticky-tack like we saw against USC, then that's where things could get really interesting. And then on the flip side, I think Indiana's receivers are just as physical. They like to maul just as much as Oregon's DBs. That's going to be fascinating to watch as well, of how physical does the officiating allow Indiana to be on the perimeter, and whoever wins those battles in space, you know, that could be another one that really decides this outcome of this game.
No, I think it's good to bring that part up too, Matt, because yeah, in rewatching that last game, there were some calls that weren't.
Elijah Surratt's touchdown looked very much like an offensive push-off.
I was going to go right to that. Yeah, exactly. There was a lot of contact there in his favor. No flag. That was a big turning point in the game. That was the go-ahead score, and ultimately they end up winning by 10 because Dante Moore throws another interception. But there's going to be hand fighting in Oregon against Texas Tech. Like, I thought that game was officiated really well in terms of there just weren't a lot of memorable bad calls, and certainly there were some aggressive coverage moments downfield that. I remember being down on the field with you, Matt, at the Orange Bowl, and there was one even in the last couple minutes. I think it was Aaron Flowers maybe in coverage that came over kind of late, and the Texas Tech fan base was kind of losing it, but no flag was seen. And I kind of would prefer that's the way these games are called just in general, because it is a physical game on the outside, and a lot of the times it is. And obviously there are instances where PI is very one-sided, but so much of – and this was the issue in the USC game for me, and I know a lot of people who watched – it felt like so many of those, like it was both guys just battling and being physical, and then the flag goes on the defender every time. That's going to be a big part of this. And then I guess just one other thing I have written down here, kind of touched on it with Bray Lynch, but like, did Mateo just get some momentum out of that last game and just that one play? It feels like that was something you expected he'd be able to get some wins the first game. He was bottled up, and it was a credit to Indiana and both their tackles for doing it. Tatum also was a little bit more impactful, but didn't have a massive Tatum game, right? They have to win on the edges, and they need both those guys to be going. And it's going to be good on good matchups because Indiana has really good offensive tackles. Oregon has really good edge players. You're going to just have to win a couple of these because you just can't. To Matt's point earlier, Fernando Mendoza is such a great quarterback in limiting mistakes. He's so good within the system. He's so decisive in where he goes to the ball. He's a very reliable, accurate passer. You got to find a way to speed him up. And some of what they do kind of counters that because this quick pass game, a lot of what we kind of saw to a certain extent with Oregon against Tech, where, it was ball out in a couple of seconds. Can't really do much about that. But in some of those third and longs where the plays have to develop a little bit longer just to get further downfield, you got to see some of these guys win. And I think we highlighted Amari against Bray Lynch as a spot, but it feels just as pivotal, if not more, to get something off the edge. And that just wasn't there in the first game and consistently enough. And I feel like it needs to be this time.
Yeah, Oregon's edge guys stepped up big in that last game against Texas Tech. So if Tatum, we've seen him develop so much this year as a pass rusher, especially adding the bull rush that he's had. He's just gotten a little bit more bendy off the edge, I feel like, to kind of finish those sacks. You need impact plays from him and Mateo to even if you're not getting home to Mendoza for sacks, at least put pressure on him and make him feel uncomfortable on some of those third downs where he can't just drop back and be able to get it out to a guy accurately. Even if you don't pressure him, make him get out of the pocket or something. Even if you can just get him off his platform, off his base, and make a throw still out of bounds, that's going to be huge for this team.
Do we want to dive into making our picks?
I think we should. Let's do it.
Go ahead, John.
All right. I'm actually going to pick Indiana in this game. I'm going to take the Hoosiers to go 20-16 over the Ducks. I think this is going to be a lower scoring game. I think it's going to look honestly a lot like what the Indiana-Ohio State game did in the Big Ten Championship. These defenses are really good, and it's going to be, I think, a battle of who can run the football and who can make the plays when they have to on third downs. And Indiana has been that team throughout the season. Oregon can absolutely beat them if they play their game. But you got to play the perfect game just about to beat this Indiana team. And it is felt like the team of destiny all season. I think they continue their path towards that national championship. But Oregon is going to be right in this one, I think, throughout it.
I think low scoring, but I think Oregon. And maybe we're being homers. Run an Oregon podcast. We cover this team. It would be good for business, frankly, if Oregon won. But I've got Oregon 24-20. I just feel like there's been growth here, and that's not to take anything away from Indiana, but this is a game where we're looking at it, and it's 3.5, 4.5 point spread. Feels like there's almost no one picking Oregon. Like and to your point, John, it feels like Team of Destiny has been taken. I don't want to say a step too far, but it just seems like everyone is just kind of conceding this game. And I think one of the things that's been interesting in kind of listening to some of the assessments is the kind of way we've chosen, or some people have chosen to remember that first meeting as a game where Indiana just drubbed Oregon, and not that it was a game that was tied in the fourth quarter. And that if, there was some sequences where Oregon could have gotten a stop here or there. There were some sequences in that first half, like where Oregon misses a field goal, Indiana hits a 55-yard kick at the end of the half or whatever it was. And Jamari Johnson drops a pass that was setting up so I think I'm fighting the narrative that it was an overmatched first game, and leaning into the fact that Oregon is better today than they were then. Now, the Jordon Davison injury gives me a little bit of pause because that was an element of this that I expected would be utilized a lot and with a lot of success, or potentially with a lot of success. The absence of that kind of almost made me flip my pick, but I'll stick with it. I'll stick with Oregon 24-20. It feels a lot better to pick the Ducks than to pick against them, even if I get the result wrong. Been pretty good in picking these upsets when they do happen. Also been bit a couple times, but I'll take the Ducks here. Maybe I'm a little too overconfident. I don't know if I'll be the only one.
Since the 2014 season, when the college football playoffs were created, there has been 5 previous rematches throughout the playoffs. Most of them have come in the last 2 years because naturally the field got expanded, which created more opportunity. But the team that lost the regular season rematch or game won 4 out of the 5 games. And the only time that the regular season loser did not win in the playoffs was when Tulane went to Ole Miss this season in the opening round and lost that game at Ole Miss. History says the regular season loser will win this game. I'm going to pick Oregon. I with part of my heart thinks they lose because of the Jordon Davison injury. That makes it really hard for the run game. And if you can't run the football against a team like Indiana, you're going to have a hard time winning. But I go back to the Texas Tech game and the growth that I felt like we saw of Dante Moore. I know that they weren't really effective in converting third downs against Tech, but he didn't look lost. He didn't look flustered or seeing ghosts like he did against Indiana earlier in the year. Sometimes the plays just weren't there because he didn't have enough time, but he knew where to go. And he gave his guys opportunities to play. I'm banking on – I think Dante Moore is a better quarterback than Fernando Mendoza. I think NFL player, I think that's also true. I also think eventually team talent kind of wins over and impacts games. And while I think Indiana significantly outplays their paperweight and significantly has shown time and time again that they are better than what their team talent composite rating is, they're still 72nd in the country. Oregon is 5th. They are by far the most talented team left in the playoffs. And I think when you continually play teams that are in that kind of echelon, eventually things break against you. It's hard for a team to play above their weight throughout the entire length of a season. So I'm going to pick Oregon 28-24. A game I will not be surprised at all if Oregon loses, but I'm also banking on the fact that Moore shows up, the defense makes the plays, and they walk out of this going to the national championship.
Yeah, that team talent composite stat stood out to me too. And I will also note, Matt, we've been betting on this. I remember going into that Fiesta Bowl with Iowa State most memorably.
State. Oh, yes.
And we forgot that, hey, because the composite says Oregon's way better, they still do have Breece Hall and Brock Purdy, and they're pretty good, and Oregon got blasted. And that Oregon team was nowhere near as good as this Oregon team. And I understand that. I'm just pointing that out because it can be a faulty metric, but I don't disagree that I think Oregon has more total talent on this team. I guess what I'm curious about is, does the depth issues we talked about earlier bite into some of that talent advantage? And I think you made a good point earlier of like, what does the practice prep look like when you're removing a dozen or so guys who are going to be crucial in some of that? So there's just so many question marks going into this one. It's going to be a blast. I'm really curious to see what Oregon team we see. I don't expect they roll over. I don't think we'll see a Ohio State 2.0 here in the semis. I think Oregon has learned from that game, and they're too talented to get blasted. I also think if Oregon loses this game, they probably lost to the eventual national champion. And
this is the national championship game.
I was just going to say, I really think the winner of this game wins the whole thing.
Real quick, do you guys – I'm a believer that Indiana probably has the slight coaching advantage.
I think maybe more than slight, because I thought they had the coaching advantage the first time, and now you've got both of Oregon's coordinators preoccupied with other jobs.
Yes.
We know they've both been out of state preparing visits at their new schools. So that's definitely front of mind for me. And I guess the other thing will be on that same topic is, how do Chris Hampton and Drew Maringer, the supposed coaches in waiting, manage that? And do we see, like, if we see awesome game plans on both sides of the ball, credit to Will, credit to Tosh, but probably also credit to the other two guys for kind of lifting everything while the other coaches are admittedly kind of off doing other things. And Oregon is very, very fortunate, though, that they're not in the Ole Miss situation. Like, of all the schools that have coaching problems and distractions, Oregon's doesn't even get close to that. What's going on?
At least Oregon knows what coaches are going to be here. LSU's finding out today and tomorrow of who's going to be available to coach, which is just sounds ludicrous to even think about. All right, it's going to do it for us here on the Autzen Audibles podcast. Next time you hear from us, it will be a post-game breakdown from the Peach Bowl. Hopefully it's a good game. Hopefully it's an entertaining game. Nonetheless, regardless of the outcome, we'll be back here breaking it all down, what it means in Oregon going forward. But until then, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
See ya.